Today is March 14th, 2016. My name is Ann Peskin, and it is my honor today to interview Polly Rauh for the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah.
Good.
Please state your name. Good morning.
Good morning. I go by Polly Rauh, although officially I'm Pauline Rauh. But I really only answer to Polly unless it's an emergency or I've done something wrong.
Ah, that's the mother's call.
That's right.
Where and when were you born?
I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, August 31st, 1933.
And let's talk a little bit about your family. Your grandparents, where they live.
Well, on my father's side, I was fourth generation born in Baltimore, and that was on my father's side. My grandfather was a professor and for a while dean of Johns Hopkins Medical School, Department of Anatomy. They lived in Baltimore all their life except when he was on Guggenheim fellowships in England and in Cleveland. My mother basically was a homebody who was busy in the community, particularly with Jewish efforts, the women, National Jewish Women's Groups, and of course you have Hadassah, which is from the Zold family, which is Baltimore. Her last name was Hecht, Hecht, and that was a family that was involved in,
The department store?
I'm sorry?
The department store.
Well, a branch, and it was in clothing, a general department store, but not the Hecht brothers.
Oh.
And that family was split. My grandfather was born in Baltimore, and my grandmother was born in Berryville, Virginia, which is a teeny tiny town, but it's where Harry Bird had apple orchards, and that store's still there today. The three brothers went down the valley. One was Front Royal, one was Berryville, and one was Harrisonburg, and that was where they got their start. That's my grandparents.
Yeah. So they
Yeah.
were also born and educated in the United States.
Everybody was the United States, completely,
Yeah.
right. My grandmother on my mother's side was born and raised until teenage in Berryville, Virginia, and then sent to Baltimore to the seminary because they were the only Jewish children in that whole region. And the seminary was an interesting place to send, but they wanted her to have the social life with Jewish people.
Now,
Well, I guess I really didn't say that was my father that
Right.
I mentioned.
Wanna go back?
My grandfather was in the brewery business, Monumental beer, which now is National Carling Black Label. But he departed from that at the time of Prohibition. So that was, and they were an old Baltimore family, and the Gutmans, which were my grandmother's side, are in the dry goods, and they're Hutzlers and Hoschels and Gutmans. So that's the Baltimore family.
so you grew up in Maryland, and when did you move to Fairfield County, or was there something
Well, I
between?
went off to college.
Which college?
I went to Oberlin College for my undergraduate degree. That's outside of
Yeah.
Cleveland. I was married. We moved to Los Angeles, and then we went back to Cleveland, And then Ed was transferred to the New York office and of Lubrizol, and that's
Do you
when we
know
came here.
what year it was?
We moved here in 1964. I'm now somewhat considered a Stanfordite because I passed the 50-year mark.
You mentioned that your family was involved were they involved in politics? I know you mentioned they were involved in community service.
Not directly. Some of my father's brothers were involved. One was an undersecretary in the Navy and things of that sort, but not actively involved in local or national politics.
And for your Jewish education, did you have any?
I went to Sunday school at a conservative
Yeah.
synagogue, his Gemuna. I was confirmed, and that basically was the formal Jewish education.
What was the dinner table like? Conversation?
It was always about something that was actively going on, either politically or nationally, internationally. My father was the kind of person who, if you said black, he could take the side and say white equally as well. So it was always a very interesting, dinner time. It was particularly interesting because my father had a lot of colleagues, including, I remember, a little lady called Margaret Mead, who came to dinner. And I still referred to her for years as that little lady. But there always was at least once a week, it was someone from the academic side, so that it was a lively conversation.
Did you celebrate the Shabbos in any way?
Yeah, well, we lit the candles, we had chicken soup, and, it was a family evening. My father came from an ultra reform, and it was new to him. It really, in many ways, was.
I bet. Now, you went to Oberlin, you said. You didn't mention what you majored in.
I majored in fine arts history, with my father saying, "What do you plan to do for a living?" And I was just engaged to my husband, and I quickly took my 30 credits required in Ohio for teaching. God forbid I would ever do that. But he went back when he was left service. He went back for his master's, and I went to teach in Shaker Heights.
Did any of your education influence your political views?
I think Oberlin probably had the biggest influence. It was always a very far out. It was one of the Harriet Tubman, and the Underground Railroad was that was a stop, and that influenced the whole environment of the community, and even to the point that at the end of my sophomore year, I announced that I was going to Mississippi when the Goodman case came along, and my father wished me well and said, your bank account is frozen. So I didn't go, but it definitely influenced where I was coming from.
Who were your political heroes when you were growing up?
Thurgood Marshall, Franklin Roosevelt, and tremendously, I would say those two were probably my greatest influence. But Eleanor Roosevelt, I felt the Roosevelt family was, to me, the epitome of balance, of courage, of direction. It really really had an impact.
Now, we've talked a little bit about politics. How would you define politics?
I spent some time
bet.
on that. And if you look in the dictionary, I don't take its first definition. It's neither an art or a science. It really isn't. I think it's guiding, and I actually wrote it down. Guiding or influencing government groups in terms of regulations, management of affairs, the course that we're going to take in the future. I don't see it on there is a very strong negative side, and I certainly think we're very aware of it, unfortunately, in the presidential debates. But it really points for the present and the future. It's not just an immediate action if it's really truly in the right course. It's competition between competing interest groups for leadership, for direction, and for power. That would be my
Interesting.
definition.
Makes more sense than some of the things we think of it as. Now, when did you decide to go into politics?
Soon after I moved here, I had had a lot of experience actually in California. I was principal of the pre-K program that fed to the University Elementary School, John Goodlad and Madeline Hunter, who are names that I think are still known. And then I moved to Stanford and found it very parochial, very staid. What they did 20 years ago was what they were going to continue to do. If they added something, they never took anything away. It just seemed to hang there, and I was really very disturbed about it. I became very close friends early with two people who influenced my life here, Ellen Kamai and Lynn Laitman. And the two of them said, get off your duff, you've got the credentials, do something. So I began to try to make some inroads at Riverbank School.
Were you teaching at all at the time?
At that time, I went back to subbing because of a real shortage. And Margaret Toner was the principal. And Joe Toner, the brother, was going to run for mayor. And he approached me through Peg Toner to run for Board of Ed.
And that was when?
That would have been in the late 60s. And I knew that it was something with 3 young children that was not going to be in my immediate future. But I began to really get involved with League of Women Voters and things of that sort, and make myself well known to board members, because I felt at that point that was the only place that you could turn, because of this very staid group that was running the school district.
Your children were in school?
At
in the
that
public
point,
school.
everybody was in school except for Kate, who was preschool. So we were Riverbank at that point. I came into really full-time substituting in 68, 69, and then decided, with a push from my husband, if you're going to spend 24 hours a day, at least get paid for it. So I had gone back to University of Bridgeport, received my master's and my administrative degree, and then I went to Northeast School at the invitation of Mark Carlucci. And from there, classroom to media specialist to director of staff development, and on, into the schools as principal downtown, and then superintendent, my big mistake, in Ardsley, New York. And I was too far away from children and where the real action was. And then I came back and finished as a principal in 1999.
Huh. So you retired after that? When
Yes.
did you retire?
I retired August 1999.
Don't we all remember the days? What party do you belong to?
I belong to the Democratic Party. I'm a Democrat because my parents were Democrats.
Were your grandparents Democrats too?
I don't know. I really don't know. And at this point, I would say I'm rather disillusioned, but that's from very personal, recent experience. So.
Now, what offices have you held that were elected since?
I was elected to the Board of Representatives in 2003, I believe. I replaced someone who was serving in the District 6 position and moved it. I don't think he moved out of town, I think he just retired. And I was approached by Ellen, by people on the city committee and others, including Annie Somerville, to think about taking that place. I did. I was appointed. And then I ran for election, I guess, twice.
Now that's
Or
within the district.
That was in, for the district seat.
What's it like when you ran with what you have to do?
We did a lot of apartment get-together kinds of things and heavy mailings. We do not have, District 6 does not have supermarkets. So there was no real standing in front of the supermarket and handing out that kind of information. Going to churches, going to meetings.
Did you spend or did you collect a lot of money? Do you remember any?
I have never had a problem on collection of money at all. I would say even then, running in the district, we collected at least $6,000. And that was hard to spend, and we gave it to Child Care Learning Center each time. So I felt it was going in the direction that could make a difference in education. Everyone felt that Annie and I would never hit it off. They were waiting, each time for a blow up, and I would say she's one of my closest friends now. We have our differences, but we agree to differ and remain good friends.
And then you stayed at the Board of Reps.
I stayed at Board of
Then what
Reps.
happened?
And then there was an opening in, I guess, 2009 on the Board of Ed. And we were going through what I thought then were some rough times. That was, there were several changing of superintendents, etc. And I threw my hat in the ring, and lo and behold, there I was.
You ran.
So I ran as one of the three nominated by the Democratic Party. And
By city committee? You were,
by city committee.
Did you have a hard time getting the backing of city committee?
I didn't then. I didn't. It was a strong, parent-oriented, education-oriented group, and I really didn't have a hard time at all. Financially, no problem. So we finally said thank you, but we've got way enough. We probably were in the $12,000 to $14,000 range at that point.
So
And
then,
then again I ran. I was
it was
I ran
2009 was the first time you ran.
right, and then I ran in 2000.
And again, did you have any problems? No, you weren't. You were an incumbent at that point.
It was I was incumbent. I really had no real problems getting elected. I was the top,
Was that with the mayor at the time?
That would have been, I think it was Bayview at that point.
Yeah.
Um,
Was it
and
different running when you were running? Because one time you ran and it was a sort of like an off election. The next time you ran with the whole party. Was it different?
well, no, I ran twice with the whole party.
Right?
Yeah, in 9 and then in 12. And it really, no, it wasn't different, but we went our own way in 2012. There was not a lot of unity of three. I don't even remember who I ran with. It's terrible to say. And Jerry Pia and Lorraine Olson were elected at that time. And
Again?
yes, I really don't remember, and I don't think it wasn't a great coming together of the minds. And that was also the time of Dr. Starr leaving. I was president of the board at that point. To do over the hiring of the next superintendent, and we were in the middle of the search, and it was I don't know, I guess you'd call it just an upheaval among enough people to put something on the agenda without my even knowing it, because you only need 3 people to place an item. And they just swept away the entire search and appointed Dr. Hamilton.
When we were looking, so how long did you serve on the board?
So I had 6 years.
And then you ran again this past year.
This year,
Was this-
I was interviewed by the city committee. They were heavily influenced by the leader, who was moved on, I gather. He immediately, when my name came up, had circulated a paper, which I didn't know, called me a traitor because I had done 2 major things. One, I had gone with Mike Malgano, who was one of the state reps to the St. Leo's Fair the year before, and he's quite impaired in a wheelchair, and held the materials for him that he gave out. I've known Mike since before his tragic accident. He was the only one of all our legislators that responded when the Board of Ed would reach out to them, and we needed him desperately. And I had done that. And the second thing was that I worked and sometimes voted with Republicans. I was not following the orders that came from city committee, and specifically from Jackie Heffman. And I lost my cool. I said, that's what democracy is. My definition of democracy is about. I'm elected to do what I believe is right for the children, the staff, the parents, and the full community. And he then put forward the name of David Manis. It was a locked, they could not get a majority on either side. And after 4 rounds, I said, look, I can solve this whole thing. I'm pulling off, and I'll see you at the polls. Well, I hadn't thought it through, because at the polls I got buried in the middle of nowhere.
There were a lot of people that were applying to be on the board, as I remember.
And they had a large number, but I was not. I was on the line of other, and I was between 2 people, and I didn't win.
Was campaigning different?
It was, I would say, cooler. And people were not as fervent about it. John had warned each person who was presently on a board or position, that if they supported me, they would not get the Democratic support. So it was very difficult in terms of that. And yet fundraising, I did as well as I ever
About the
done.
same amount of money?
And that money, the surplus of that money went to a program at, for youngsters. Toquan School lived down near the Domus Old Rogers
Right.
School. And even though Domus gets it for $1 a year, they were charging them exorbitant rent to use the cafeteria. And the other, trying to think what I did with the other, went to an equally educationally oriented.
Now I know that.
Oh, I know what it was. It's to pay for the cutback in dollars from the state for training the non-accredited nursery school people. So my monies will pay for a series of workshops that they have felt have been very valuable.
Now I know there were a number of debates. Many.
For many.
Were they difficult?
I would say that you know, obviously, there were enough people with different points of view that it was all over the place. I probably found the most difficult the night at the Yearwood Center when to sum up, each person was asked, and I said, most of this board will be a new board. And I really feel that my background, my experience would be valuable to help understand the past so we can decide for the future. And then Mr. Manis spoke and said, while I learned almost everything I know about it from you, I have no need to have your guidance and don't wish you to be on the board. At which point, one of the candidates stood up and said, this is uncalled for, and left the table. So it was a very different
Yeah.
experience.
Now that we've got you on and off the board, can you tell me who were among your mentors during your entire political career, up to this point anyway?
Well, I would say that certainly both Ellen Camhigh and Lynn Laitman. I had a lot of general support from people, and a lot of people who were in education or in professional areas, but not necessarily front acting in the political scene. And one person who really influenced me, I think, to stand by what I believe, was Superintendent Dr. Robert Peebles. And he was someone that was very special in almost every single way. I hope you agree, because I know you knew him well.
I worked under him too, you're right, or with him.
And you know, another person was actually Ruby Carlucci. And
Yes.
she had been very active in the party, principal, other administrators, and to this day I hear from her and get that, keep it going. So,
Tell me, what were the obstacles you faced?
in terms of,
Well, I guess more political than in your work.
I think it was not being absolutely true to the Democratic demands. And there definitely are Democratic demands in this town through the political party. And saying, we can't count on you. This is what we want, we can't count on you necessarily. And I found that was, was definitely at least personally to me, an obstacle. Right or wrong, I don't know. I did not feel that there were any obstacles in terms of my being a Jew at all. I will say there were obstacles in my being a woman, and there were questions about, how can she come out and lead the parade on something like that? I mean, she's just a woman.
Well,
So,
Could you give an example of one of the times you voted your heart and your mind instead of with what the Democratic Party wanted you to do?
well, I don't know that it would have been a combination, but I think one of them was not voting for the high school principal for Stanford High School. And in the back room, it was a 4-4, an unknown. And when we got out on the floor, it was an 8-1. And the feeling was, how could you do that? And I said, because there's too much known that doesn't fit. So unfortunately, it proved that I was on the right path. But I've done my homework, and I would say that very often in the at least the Democratic Party, a lot of homework's not done. It's connections.
You had a number of issues during the time of your time on the board. Were there any special ones you want to talk about?
Well, we had issues of leadership on the paid side, the superintendent, and the various turnovers. And it was frequent, but often not the right people. We had the what I thought was going to be a positive direction of looking at more school choice, not charter school, but looking at the magnet school, theme school issues, because we have enormous number of people applying, over 700 out of 1,000 in kindergarten every year want one of the magnets or more, but these are individual count. And we seem to be going someplace, and then the superintendent had the intergroup say it's not appropriate for now. We of course had the high school situation at Stanford High with the non-reporting to DCF.
You were there during that
I
period.
was there through the whole thing. The only thing I missed was by 10 days having to vote on that, on the final dismissal. Those were the kind of issues. A lot of staff changing, a lot of staff leaving, and not necessarily wanting to address the whys and wherefores. Union administration was in total turmoil until this last change. We sat weekly on grievances. I don't think there've been 3 or 4 grievances in the last year and a half. There were those types of issues and tremendous pressure to reduce benefits costs for our staffing. And we did do it, exactly what we had been talking with the city government, and they haven't followed through.
For the teachers and for the
teachers, for the custodians, for the administrators. We've made major positive changes, and we stand alone.
not the other areas. Is working with the union difficult? If I know.
I didn't find it difficult. I found it sometimes aggravating on some of what the issues were. But if you sit down with people and talk through the past, the situation, what are the possible outcomes, I don't have a problem. They were my supporters when I ran again.
Did you do anything
Even
without
financially.
arbitration? Did you need arbitration in any of the issues that you had?
I never went to arbitration. No,
Interesting.
we came close. And in fact, when the custodians, that it was the administrators, the attorneys, their attorney had left, and I said, come on guys, let's sit down again. And by the time he got back to his office, it had settled. So, sometimes the threat of arbitration can bring reality, people to their senses.
So how long were you the president?
I had 2 years as president.
2 years?
And then I was followed by 2 years of Jeff Allswinger, and then 1 year of Jackie Hefman.
Let's turn to what was your proudest moment in public office.
My proudest moment when? In
While
the
you
school?
were in office.
Oh, while I was in office.
Or just in general, if you can think of what you accomplished.
I think that the things that where I really feel I made some accomplishment were times that I got everybody involved early on in decisions that I pretty well knew where I thought we should be going. But by getting the group together, talking it through, listening to each other, compromising, it can happen. And I guess in the school part of it, it first came together for me with the Westover School, where we were ordered by the Office of Civil Rights to make a change. This is way back. And the minority population was 89%. It was an old school. It was in an area that people really didn't want to go to send their children. And we spent hours and hours and hours with people in the community, with the staff, even with the children. And that school has maintained itself at the very top because everybody agrees with where they're going and how they're going to get there. They're all rowing in the same direction. And they have youngsters from all parts of the community. They have hundreds of people who are turned down every year for a lottery seat. And their results are fabulous. And it maintained even when they broke up the area around the hospital and sent those children as part of the inner group beyond lottery. And then I was able to do the same thing at Roxbury when I went there. I went there having been director of staff development, and they had a principal who felt he knew everything, and they were going to be different, and he didn't need, my staff developers had never ever done anything in that school, and people said, oh boy, watch it. And when I went in, I knew that it had to change, and I simply, at my first or second staff meeting, said, I have a question I'd like you to think about. What do you want our children, when they leave here, what do you want them to be and be able to do? And everybody looked at everybody else. And from that, we started Tuesday afternoon dinners that the PTO brought in. We started with 12, and I had all but one teacher at the table by the end of the year. And that was when we started the Success for All Students and Staff program. And the cross-age group, the teams, almost everything. There were things that the union swallowed very hard, but their people wanted it just as well as I did. And that school went from the next to bottom school to the next to top. I never could quite reach Westover, but Westover had the extra money. We didn't. But it also threw the myth out the window that it's the money that makes the difference. It's the people. And I think that's the kind of thing that had happened in politics and in education that I would leave as my legacy, that it's everybody together and
Community.
you're going to be able to make that difference.
So leadership is
So-
important.
It's, you know, and I mean, I had written the Westover model, and there were many things I wanted from that Westover model. And I remember Jill Beaudry on the board saying, Polly, all I can come up with is $1,000 for training. And instead, I chose to do the training with Heidi Hayes Jacobs, who's quite a well-known person on curriculum development in the summers, in exchange for her coming and working once or twice a month with all of my staff. So there are ways to skin many cats, but I think that you know, I think it worked on the Board of Reps, and I think it certainly has worked in the schools. There are schools that are still doing it, even though they're back to everybody on a guided page. This is Tuesday, you're on page 22, whether the children already know the materials or if they are lacking the base on which to learn it. But it's going on, subterfuge, but it's going on.
Tell me, now that we've talked to the good side, what is any regrettable moment that you can think of in terms of your life as a
Well, I think the Democratic City Committee night was haste, not thought out. And the other one was in my professional life, taking the superintendency in Ardsley. It was too far away from children. It was like living in under a spyglass because it's so small. And I did exactly what they wanted, to revise curriculum and reorganize. But in a small community with 1,900 students, you touch somebody's neighbor or themselves when you make any decision. And I couldn't wait to get back to children and teaching and what it's all about. So I came back to Stanford after 4 years.
You said that being Jewish didn't affect your career at all.
No, I only had one incident from a disturbed parent in the front hall at Roxbury School when she yelled at me, "You're nothing but a Christ killer," because I had reprimanded her son for instigating an issue. But the superintendent was Mike Nass, and he called me, he said, "What's going on?" I said, "The faster you get this woman out of here." He said, "She wants out." I said, "Please, tomorrow, the things will be on the platform." She just, and then went on to Still Meadow and had equally difficult undertaking.
Now you have three children.
Yeah,
Did any of them get involved in politics, or
No.
would you want them to?
no. No, I don't think they had the temperament for it. And I just don't see any of them in that way. They all ended up in very technical areas of computers, internet. Kate's with Amazon. They're not the compromising, and they're, two of the three are very impatient. And
Let's hope they vote.
they do. Although, in fact, I can remember when the oldest went down to register, Nancy Tatana called me and said, Edward is here to register as a Republican. What should I do? I said, he's there.
You did tell us about your legacy. Is there anything else that you want to tell us that we haven't touched upon?
Not really. I think that it's important to be involved. I think it takes a certain type of person to go that political route. And I guess, I can only think of Phil Baker, who was a longtime administrator here, who described me as a sabra, prickery on the outside and mush inside. And I think that's a combination you really need. You've got to be totally sensitive and caring about whatever the issue may be, but you got to be able to take it on the outside, and believe me, there are many people who dish it out. So,
Thank you so much.
well, I enjoyed this.
And I did
hope
too.
It was helpful, and good luck on the project.
Thank you. Appreciate that.